If you've been asking God for a sign to leave your relationship, this is for you. Sometimes we rely on signs too much when we already know what God is telling us to do. If you are stuck in a toxic or abusive or narcissistic relationship and you're like, God, send me a sign if I'm supposed to leave. Sometimes you might see a sign, and then other times you might keep asking and not see a sign at all, and then you won't leave until you see a sign. Maybe God is not showing you any more signs because He already has told you what to do. Your circumstances are the signs. You getting abused, cheated on, lied to constantly when you are not married and you don't have a responsibility to keep working on this relationship. God has already showed you the signs. And coming from someone who has been in toxic relationship after toxic relationship, that's actually how God saved me. I was stuck in an abusive and toxic relationship for years, and I could not get out of it in my own strength. And finally, I had had enough. I called on God. He saved me from abusive and a toxic relationship. And leading up to me leaving, I kept asking God, God, show me a sign of this. God, show me a sign of that. And at the beginning, when I was asking for these signs, I kept seeing them. But towards the end of the relationship, when it was filled with more abuse and more lies and more cheating and more chaos and all the things, I wasn't seeing the specific signs that I started asking for. And I'm like, okay, God, like maybe I'm not supposed to leave. And I stayed in that relationship for even more weeks and even more months. Finally, it got to the point where it was so bad where I was forced to leave because otherwise I would have not saved my own life. And finally, I was like, all right, God, this is clearly not from you. So I'm going to take the leap of faith and just trust that you're telling me to leave this relationship, even though I haven't seen the sign. Now, God gave me a revelation when I was trying to make this video the other day, and I'm so glad that it did not work. I made this TikTok video, and literally the video just disappeared. I tried filming it multiple times, and for some reason, I thought it was the enemy, but now looking back, I'm like, maybe it was God because He gave me a new divine revelation to come on here and make this video. Did you know that the last two words in Mark's gospel, it says signs following, and we wish that it said signs preceding. The last two words say signs following. And if we want to see God move, we need to make a move. If it seems like God isn't moving in our lives, maybe it's because we aren't moving. Sometimes we want God to go first. We're like, we're not going to take a step unless God, you show us the sign or you show us the way. But in the last two words of Mark's gospel, it says signs following. Because if we were to always see a sign before doing what we know God is calling us to do, what kind of faith does that take? That doesn't take any faith. That way we wouldn't need to exercise any faith at all. We have it all backwards. And that's exactly what happened in my relationship. And I want to share a personal story. And I'm actually reading, if I'm looking down, I'm reading parts of my book because God led me to write this book back in 2022. It has sold over thousands of copies. It has saved hundreds of women's lives. I get emails still to this day of how my book has saved people's lives. If you want to go look up the reviews on Amazon, you can read what people are saying. But on TikTok Shop, I'm actually selling them signed personal copies. God, I pray over each book, and whatever God puts in my heart for that specific person, I will write a message for that person. And I have already sold 30 something on TikTok Shop, and I just started this like 2 weeks ago. So it is really cool to see God moving. But I want to share a personal story of why this is such an important thing of not always relying and depending on signs. So I'm going to be sharing a story from a chapter that I wrote in my book called God Won't Move Unless You Do. And every single thing that I've written in this book is based on a personal testimony and my personal experience of what God was doing in my life during this relationship breakup. And this book is based on narcissistic relationships. It's also for abusive and toxic relationships. And through this book, I share how God literally delivered me from a very toxic narcissistic relationship and the spiritual demonic things behind narcissistic and toxic relationships, and how God allowed me to break the trauma bond through divine supernatural strength and just divine protection. And so this has literally saved so many women breaking the chains from these toxic relationships. And so towards the end of this relationship, I kept asking God, I'm like, God, show me a sign of a blue jay. Now, I don't know why I asked for a blue jay. I have no connection to blue jays. I didn't even know what a blue jay looked like. I didn't have anything to do with blue jays. Like, I don't even know why I asked for this. One day I was just praying and I'm like, God, okay, God, show me a sign of a blue jay if I'm supposed to leave my ex and never talk to him again. I have already tried to leave this relationship 6 times, and literally in my own strength, nothing ever seemed to work. I kept going back to the relationship, and finally I was like, okay, you know what, God, I'm going to leave. I'll do whatever you ask me to do, but show me a sign of a blue jay to confirm if I'm supposed to do this. Weeks went by, months went by. no blue jay sign. So I kept staying in this relationship. I kept getting cheated on. I kept getting lied to. I kept feeling like my life was never going to get out of this toxic cycle. And I'm like, why am I still waiting for a sign when I already know that this is not what God has for me? Why am I still in this? Because I was in denial and I was wanting a sign to reassure me that I was making the right decision. When we ask for a sign, that already goes to show you what we want. If we're asking God for a sign, that means that we already know what to do, but we're just looking for reassurance because we don't trust ourselves. And when you're in an abusive and toxic relationship, you don't trust yourself, so you want everything to be reassured. And so I didn't see the sign of a blue jay. Finally, this relationship, like I was saying, forced me to leave. It got so dangerous that I finally was forced to leave, and God allowed that for a reason. But when I finally left that relationship and I went no contact for literally, it was one day I went no contact. Now, this was already the 6th time. I've already tried going no contact before for months and weeks before. But this time was different. And that night, after I left, after I took the leap of faith and trusted in God that He would show up, I was like, okay, God, I'm trusting you. I went no contact. That night, I had a dream that I was playing Wheel of Fortune and it landed on a sign of a blue jay. And I remember waking up the next morning and I told my best friend and I told her what my dream was. And I was like, I think this was a sign from God. I've been asking for a blue jay. And my friend said something to me I will never forget. And she said, Alicia, she's like, I love that God showed up for you, but why do you need a sign when you already know that that is what God was telling you to do? Why did you need a sign to leave a toxic and abusive relationship? Why did you need a sign if you knew that that was unhealthy? And I could not let that question leave my mind because I'm like, you're right. Why did I need a sign when God was already showing me the signs in my circumstances? I didn't need a sign of a blue jay to know what God was telling me to do. And sometimes we rely on signs so much, but did you know that the Bible also says that the devil comes and also shows signs and wonders just like God? When the devil knows how you speak to God and how you hear from God, he will literally show up and mimic those same ways. He will mirror how you already hear from God, so you get those confused. And I did not know that because at this time I wasn't reading my Bible, but when I read that, I think it's in 1 Thessalonians or 2 Thessalonians, it's about how Satan comes as also deceiving you with signs and wonders just like God. So don't depend on the signs. The signs are sometimes in your circumstances. I'm not saying that God can't show up in signs. He definitely does, and He definitely can speak through anything, but do not depend on the signs. Sometimes your circumstances are your signs. So anyways, I had the dream of the blue jay. And I told my friend, and literally I was like, maybe it's just a dream. Like, I was like, maybe that's just a coincidence. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm still going to trust you. I'm still going no contact. And so that day I changed my phone number. And I'm like, I'm just going to change my phone number. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to go all in, change my phone number, go no contact, and never talk to my ex again. Even though I was like, I didn't get the sign of the sign that I wanted. I want to sign your sign. Sometimes we do that. We want to sign your sign. And I was just praying, God, I was like, God, please show up. And I went to the beach that day. I left my phone at home because I'm like, I don't even want the temptation to text my ex with my new number that I just got. And so finally we went to the beach. I left my phone at home. We're driving back from the beach. I had been 5 hours without a phone and I was so sad. So much guilt was coming over me and shame. And I'm like, is it mean that I ignored him? Is it mean that I went no contact? Like, this is how narcissistic relationships work. You feel so much guilt when you know that you're doing the right thing, but you just feel so much shame and guilt. And I remember driving back and I just almost wanted to start crying, and I stopped at a stop sign in the middle of this neighborhood, and I was just like, I just sat there and I was literally praying in my head, closing my eyes. And as I opened my eyes, you guys, I kid you not, the road said Blue Jay Lane. I was on Blue Jay Lane. And when I read this the other day, that the last 2 words in Mark's gospel was signs following, God showed up after I took action. God showed up after I took action. And if this is speaking to you and you're in a toxic relationship or in a relationship that you know that God has not confirmed, God has not ordained, and you are seeing the fruit that is rotten, it is not bearing fruits of the Spirit, God is telling you to leave it, and you do not need a sign to leave that relationship. And if you are still stuck in a toxic relationship and you cannot get out, I suggest you get my book. It has literally changed hundreds of women's lives. I talk about how God literally delivered me out of this relationship, how He healed me from going back, and I talk about so many things in this book. Hope, encouragement, and just things of the future that I know that will encourage you to take that leap of faith and trust God.